I'm Karis Kelly and I'm a playwright. What distinguishes theatre from other storytelling mediums is the immediacy and actually that there's a communication and a communion that happens between the actors and the audience, and when you're in a room and you feel that, it can be completely electrifying and it's kind of like nothing else. For me, it's really important to make your audience uncomfortable. I know that not all writers feel that way, but I do, because I think that that's the only way you're going to challenge people, is when you have them almost pushed to the back foot. I think it's really difficult to make political work at a time when a lot of institutions are trying to be apolitical, but I think it's the most important time to make political work. With my experience of coming from Northern Ireland and being what would be considered over there mixed marriage, I think politics is always, my living and my being is a political act. So I think politics is, it's in everything. I don't think a play can exist outside of the context within which we're living. Identity is a huge theme of my work. Growing up in London as someone whose parents were from Northern Ireland and left during the conflict and then returned, I've always had an interesting relationship with my identity, because within the London Irish community, I was Northern Irish. Back in Northern Ireland, I was either Catholic or Protestant, dependent on which family members I was around. And then, having since moved to Northern Ireland, I have an English accent. So I'm always existing outside of my identities. And actually, that's very, very helpful in some ways to be a writer, because I would sit in rooms and serious topics would be talked about as if I wasn't there. And so I just got to hear and was immersed in all these conversations, and so much of that feeds into my work. And also there's a quote that says that a good writer should be a stranger in every place that they go, and that's kind of how I feel. I have multiple homes. Consumed is a play that I wrote during lockdown, shortly after getting a diagnosis for obsessive compulsive disorder, which I'd had my whole life, and it took till I was in my 30s to realise what was going on. And within the confines of lockdown, I sat down and thought, right, I'm going to figure out where this has come from. And so went on a really interesting journey around transgenerational trauma, around Northern Ireland, and actually Ireland has one of the highest prevalences of OCD in Europe, and where that comes from, and kind of went into a route of really exploring my ancestry and my history and understanding how that impacts on my mental health and what things are passed down through the genes. So Consumed is the story of 4 generations of Northern Irish women. And it is about mothers, and it's about love, and it's about food, and it's about how a 90th birthday party causes all of these issues to come to the fore. I think my work always has quite a dark, surreal edge to it, so I'm always interested in stories that kind of look at that. I'm interested in using surrealism to tell human stories. So for example, with Consumed, that OCD and eating disorders are explored through how each character responds to food that's presented to them. So, but also embedding that in really naturalistic settings. So I loved stories that start off naturalistic and end up extremely surreal. One of the things that I talk about a lot with Consumed is that it's actually a magic trick, and it's presented as a magic trick. You think it's one thing and it's actually something completely different. And by the end of the play, you realise that the play you thought you were watching is not the play you were watching. So I always love work that explores really human topics through kind of a surreal, dark comedy lens. So for a surreal work to land, it has to be in dialogue with work that already exists. So for example, I'm heavily influenced by people like Carol Churchill, who, if you look at Top Girls, it's actually 3 different genres in one play. You move from naturalism to realism to surrealism, or actually between all 3 of those genres at once. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants when I play with genre, but I think an audience comes to the work, and I think the surprise of Consumed always lands in a room, because I've lulled the audience into thinking that they're watching a naturalistic dinner party kitchen sink drama, and then the reveal happens and there are always audible gasps. So that's always a delight, and I love tricking an audience, basically. I write very visually, And I kind of often get told, you can't do that. And that's kind of why I started to work in film and TV as well, is because visually it felt like it was easier to create the imagery that I wanted to in film and TV. Although I use violence as a touchstone in my work and I explore it, I actually think it's really important to treat violence with due diligence in theatre, because as intimacy coordinators are beginning to understand, an actor's body doesn't experience that it's acting. So when you have actors inflicting violence on other actors, that the victim of that violence on stage, their body is experiencing it as violence. So I think it's really important to use it very carefully, very wisely. The violence is usually a metaphor for something else. So hopefully that softens the blow to the audience. What I'm trying to do is kind of saturate them with imagery so that they go away and think about it, rather than make them feel what it might be like to have violence inflicted upon them. I think theatre is incredibly educational. I think that as a writer, certainly for me, I can't speak for other people, when I create work, it's to change hearts and minds. I think that drama is one of the best tools to allow someone to cipher into someone else and use that person as a cipher, and so they can experience what it might be like to be that person. And I think that that's a really helpful way to educate people on others' experiences. So yeah, I think theatre can be really educational. And actually, really interestingly enough, the play that I wrote recently, Black Magic Ops, I wrote it in mind for an English audience because it's about child death that occurred during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which is a conversation that's not really spoken about or had. And I really want to put that in front of an English audience because I'd love for them to understand the history of what happened in the north of Ireland during the conflict. You never want to hit your audience over the head with a hammer about your chosen subject, and actually often you can feel when you're doing that as a writer. A lot of the feedback that I got around Consumed was that there was a lot of science chat in it. So I thought about how I could make that science chat embedded into the action, and so a really easy trick to do that, to educate whilst also having your audience be enthralled by the story, is to find a way to have your characters doing something with the information. So in this setup, a daughter is trying to get her mother to listen to her, another daughter is trying to get her mother to admit that she hasn't mothered her very well, and it's all being told through the science of transgenerational trauma, and that discussion happens. It's characters doing stuff to each other, and that's a really clever way to embed expositional information into your play. So I was writing for about 14 years before winning the Women's Prize. I entered it on a complete whim. Genuinely, Consumed was second draft and had been kind of written in a flurry during lockdown, and then had a development reading at the Lyric in Belfast. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to send it off. And it was more about making sure I was putting my work out there than actually expecting to win. So I have to say I was genuinely blown away that I won. I'm still genuinely blown away that I won. Also won the Peggy Ramsey bursary, the Film for Peggy Ramsey bursary, which gave me the time to spend a year writing Black Magic Ops. So the play has done really amazing things for me and my career, and actually it helped birth another play. So that was incredible, and I'm so grateful to the Women's Prize and to Paynes Plough, and also to Peggy Ramsey and Film 4 for the opportunities. Prizes like the Women's Prize are extremely important, especially in a theatre ecology where I still don't feel that there's parity for women in terms of opportunities. Certainly that's apparent within the specific context that I write, which is in the north of Ireland, but I know that it's a UK-wide problem. So highlighting female and non-binary voices is really, really important, because we're still not at a place where I think women are afforded the same opportunities. before winning the Women's Prize, I'd done a lot of work around not needing external validation anymore. And it's almost as soon as I'd said to myself, right, I don't need any more external validation, then I won the Women's Prize. And it was like, now I have to really work around having this big, massive piece of external validation, which was really interesting. And really difficult to navigate at times because you don't want to rely on external validation. You want to know that the work that you do is worthy, whether or not it wins prizes. And I think when you're a writer and you know that something's working, you feel it. And I think it's about following that impulse at all times. And I think prizes like this are so important. But I also think it's really important to believe in yourself enough and not have to win a prize necessarily. I was so delighted that Payne's Plough were a co-producer of the prize. I actually, very interestingly, interned for them back in 2008 as my first job in theatre. So it wasn't this artistic team at the time, but Payne's Plough have always been really important to me in terms of my theatre journey. So felt very full circle to win the prize with them at the helm. I think they're incredible fosterers of new writing and new writing talent, and I'm really excited to work with them and get consumed off the ground. I would say to people that think that new writing is a risk, that they need to stop treating theatre as a capitalist medium. And I think actually we should go back to older models of theatre that allowed for risk. So if you think about the Royal Court, when it was first established, I believe it was a theatre club, and you would pay a certain amount. And that would give you access to shows, and everyone was involved in that club. So it was kind of like a socialist model for theatre. What that allowed the Royal Court at the time to do was to put on incredibly risky plays because it didn't have to rely on seats sold and tickets sold. So I think we kind of need to shift our thinking around theatre, and I think that if we don't put on plays that are a risk, we're going to lose such a body of work. I also think that you're really underestimating the intelligence of your audiences when you decide that you can't put on a piece of work because it's a risk. You're sort of deciding what someone's preference is and what their taste is for them. And I think that audiences are extremely intelligent, and that we should give them the opportunity to see the breadth of theatre rather than deciding before them what they're going to want to buy. I think that that's really counterproductive to creativity and to art, actually. I personally struggle to see a world in which business and creativity meaningfully coexist, because I think once you make an artist a product, then there's an expectation about what they're going to deliver. And I think that that is the opposite of creativity. I think that it is just creating rules for a creative. So I think they can coexist, and I think incredible businesses fund the theatre industry in a lot of ways, but I think meaningful connection is actually extremely difficult. I would like to think that theatre is inherently socialist, but I think that is actually a very naive viewpoint in the day and age that we live. I don't think that the working class voice is emerging anymore, and I think that there are numerous reasons for that. So I think theatre should be socialist. I think it should speak to every community, but I do, know that the reality of the theatre world at the moment is that certain voices are being given preference and certain communities are excluded. The biggest change that I would like to see in theatre is for it to be made accessible again to everyone. I think that current seat pricing is excluding many communities from accessing theatre. I also think the voices that are being supported in many parts of theatre and the voices that are managing to break through are not working class voices anymore. I also know that there are, there's a certain type of story that's being told again and again. That in and of itself is an act of exclusion to many communities. So I would like theatre to go back to being for everyone. I think that there are a lot of ways that we can do that, but that would be a much, much longer conversation.